Lauren Spierer has become a household name.
One of the highest profile missing person cases in America.
We believe that the chances are very great that there was foul play, because otherwise we feel Lauren would have made contact by now.
Hi guys, thanks for being with me today as we discuss the case of Lauren Spierer, a 20-year-old college student who went missing from Bloomington, Indiana on June 3rd, 2011. Lauren attended the college with her boyfriend Jesse Wolf, who she'd been with for about 3 years, and their mutual friend Jay, who they'd met at a summer camp years before, and many other friends that she'd made along the way. The night before Lauren's disappearance, she was in her apartment block watching the NBA Finals game and drinking with some friends, while her boyfriend Jesse was in his own apartment watching the NBA game. Apparently he and Lauren were texting back and forth during the night, and it might have been around 12 a.m. that there was a text between them, and she said, "I'm going to bed," and he said, "Okay, well, if you wake up, we'll talk." And I think it's reported that he went to bed around that time. So Jay has texted Lauren at some stage and asked her to come over to a house party at his apartment, and she walks over there, leaves her apartment at 12:30 a.m. with a friend called David Rohn, and he walks her to Jay's house, and he doesn't stay for very long, so he goes back to his own apartment, and CCTV showed that David Rohn hadn't actually exited the building again until 11 a.m. the next day, so he's kind of like out of the picture in terms of being involved in any of this. Jay's apartment is only a 5-minute walk away from Lauren's Smallwood apartments, and he lives at the 5 North townhouses. Now, at the party, Lauren continues to drink, and she's seen talking to a guy called Corey Rossman for most of the night. Now, she's known Corey for only 2 days, and he lives 2 doors down from Jay's house with a roommate called Mike Beth. Lauren and Corey leave Jay's party and they head off to Kilroy Sports Bar. First off, stopping off at Corey's place, and he tells Mike Beth he needs 3 more drinks to feel good. So they've gone to Kilroy's and arrived there around 2 a.m. Kilroy's is about a 9-minute walk from Corey's apartment. It's been said that because Lauren was underage, she was 20 years old, that Corey must have been buying her drinks for the time that they were there, and they were there for about half an hour. They were sitting out on a patio, and it's got sand, and it just looked like a beach kind of landscape there, so she kicked off her shoes and she had her bare feet sitting in the sand. Witnesses later stated that they saw Lauren was extremely intoxicated, to the point where when her and Corey had left, she'd actually left her shoes and her phone behind. And Lauren was not able to walk by herself. They said that Corey was actually holding her up and assisting her to walk. So Lauren, unable to walk properly, is barefoot, being held up by Corey and walking a 3-minute distance to her Smallwood apartment. Now, when they get there, they get in the elevator, they go up to the 5th floor, the elevator doors open, and there are a bunch of guys standing outside the elevator who know Lauren, and apparently are friends with Jesse, her boyfriend. So there's been an altercation between one of the guys, Zach Oakes, who actually asked Lauren, "Are you okay?" and was very concerned, I would assume, because he doesn't know Corey or doesn't know him that well, probably wondering why has this guy got his hands on Lauren. So things escalated between Zach and Corey. Corey mouthed off to Zach. Zach decked Corey. Corey's on the ground, and his lawyer later on stated that Corey had actually suffered memory loss because of it. So the guys must have moved on, and Lauren and Corey, they're right near her apartment, but they didn't go into her apartment. Apparently they left Smallwood's apartment, and they were sitting outside the front. Lauren was on the concrete step out the front. A witness had later stated that she saw Lauren, had asked if she's okay because she'd seen that Lauren had fallen back and hit her head on the step. And Corey had said, "No, she's fine, I'm looking after her." And so the woman, walked on. And so what's happened is Lauren has gotten up at some stage from there with Corey and has actually walked through an alleyway going towards back to his apartment. So along that 6-minute walk, or whatever it is there, from her apartment to the 5 North townhouse. It's getting confusing. They're stumbling, or she's stumbling, but apparently he was as well. I don't know how drunk he was, but Lauren was extremely intoxicated to the point where she actually had a fall. It's been stated that she fell flat on her face. She wasn't even able to break her fall with her arms. That's how bad she was. So Corey picks her up over his shoulder and carries her all the way back to his apartment. Meanwhile, she's lost her key and her purse in that alleyway.
It's now about 3 in the morning, and they are heading up this deserted alley towards his apartment a few blocks away.
She's barefoot walking along here. She actually falls down twice in this alley, according to surveillance cameras. He eventually grabs her, throws her over his shoulder in a fireman's carry, and literally carries her the rest of the way to his apartment, which is about a block from here.
She was not cared for in a way that I would want my son to care for another. And that's what kind of gets me, because the circumstances, I think, could have been a lot different had Lauren been escorted back to her apartment.
But instead, they end up at Rossman's place,
They go in here briefly.
where his roommate later says Rossman got sick
He vomits on the steps.
and went to bed. The roommate takes Lauren next door to another friend,
It's about 30 feet to Jay Rosenbaum's door here on the left.
Jay Rosenbaum.
Jay sees what bad shape Lauren is in and said, Lauren, lay down on the couch, go to sleep, go home in the morning. And she won't do it. She says, I want to keep going, I want to go. Jay walks her to the door, and he sees her walk up 11th Street. He's the last person we are aware of that sees her alive.
As police begin to suspect foul play, all 3 young men, the longtime boyfriend, the new friend, and the last person who saw her alive, are identified by authorities as persons of interest.
Lauren's boyfriend, Jesse, had called Lauren's phone the next day, apparently in the afternoon, and an employee at the Kilroy Sports Bar had actually answered the phone, and that's when he realised that Lauren was missing. He'd obviously gone to her apartment, possibly called friends to find her, and I think he obtained a spare key from her roommate to check the room. Lauren's mum, Lauren Spierer, had told ABC News that around dinner time, her and her husband, Rob, had actually received a phone call from someone. I'm not sure if it was the boyfriend or police, but someone had advised them about Lauren being missing. Now, I find it interesting that Lauren's boyfriend, Jesse, had apparently called her phone at 3 p.m. and realised she'd gone missing. Other sources state, and other reports I've read have stated, that he actually had reported her missing at 4:30 p.m. So why did it take from 4:30 p.m. till dinner time to alert the parents? It might not seem too long, a 2-hour thing here, but there's a girl missing. So why were the parents not told earlier? You know, I'm just stating, if that is the case, why? You know, why was it taking 2 hours later for them to be alerted? When police searched Lauren's apartment, they found a small amount of cocaine in her room.
Bloomington, like many college towns, has its dark side, with students describing rampant alcohol abuse and a thriving drug scene.
Cocaine, Xanax, all types of different drugs, marijuana. Some people dipped into acid.
Seth Parker, now clean, says he was part of that scene.
It was just a whole bunch of college kids that had money and could afford to do the things that they were doing.
Including Lauren Spierer.
So drugs, unfortunately, are the key component to this case.
On the night she vanished, Lauren was in full party mode soon after leaving her apartment.
I think she didn't make wise choices that night, but she didn't make herself disappear.
She spent a lot of the evening with a student she had just met, Corey Rossman, who other students would later say described a wild night.
He's like, well, me and Lauren were hanging out, just partying, pre-gaming before we went to Kilroy's watching the game.
They got to Kilroy's around 2 in the morning.
They're only there about 30 minutes. But during that time period, she leaves her shoes and her cell phone in the bar. And I think that gives you some indication about how out of it she may be at this point.
Notably not with Lauren that night was Jesse Wolfe, her longtime boyfriend since high school in New York.
Any rational boyfriend is going to be concerned if you're out with other boys, particularly at 2 o'clock in the morning, potentially drunk in a bar.
So as a veteran investigator, does that raise questions of motive, possible jealousy?
Of course.
No witness reported seeing Wolf out that night, and he says he was at home watching the NBA Finals, which ended just before midnight. And then, according to his roommate, he went to bed around 2:30 a.m. Wolf would not agree to be interviewed on camera by 2020, but says he has cooperated with the police and continues to deny any involvement in Lauren's disappearance.
He's the most loving boyfriend you can ask for.
At the time, Lauren's friend said Jesse couldn't have possibly harmed Lauren.
He would never do anything to hurt her.
I'm not suggesting he did anything, but I'm not comfortable that I actually know what he was doing in the early morning hours of June 3rd.
Even more than Wolf, Garrett has questions for Corey Rossman.
There's always been this sort of suspicion around Corey as to, well, did you really end up passing out and going to bed before she disappeared?
I was not the last person with her. This is all I can say. I'm sorry, but I just hope that they find her as soon as possible, and I'm praying for her and her family.
Adding to the parents' anger, they say Rossman was the one friend who refused to talk to them or their investigators. And he claims he lost all memory of what happened after being slugged at Lauren's apartment building.
That punch or punches caused him a temporary memory loss.
Do you buy that?
No, I don't. I think it's a case of self-preservation.
He knows more than he's saying.
I'm not sure of anything, but what I do know is that there's been a complete lack of cooperation. And he was the person that spent the most time with Lauren in the last hours of her being seen.
And he hasn't come forward to try to help?
No, he's resisted.
Corey Rossman refuses to speak to the parents and to their private investigator. They won't do police polygraphs. They've only done polygraph tests through their own private, lawyers, things like that. So nobody knows what the outcome of those polygraphs were. But Corey has completely just closed off. He hasn't spoken to the parents. There's been no explanation, no kind of empathy shown, just a quick cut off, doesn't want to have anything to do with it, swiftly turns from the reporter and walks away. It's really strange, guys. And I understand. I have to say I do understand that these guys were young. They've been advised by their parents and by their lawyer to not say a word. It's like no comment kind of thing. But you would expect some kind of presence known, like, oh, I was with her that night and I'm really sorry to hear about this. Let me know anything I can do to help. Like, that's the kind of reaction you would expect somebody to do, especially when they're the ones who've been hanging out with their, he's the one that's been hanging out with their daughter for most of the night and giving her drinks, supplying them from the bar. And, hopefully nothing else, as well, like drugs or anything. So the fact that he was supplying them to a minor, she was underage, I feel he should be held accountable for that. Many locals of Bloomington volunteered to search for Lauren, and her boyfriend Jesse had actually been a part of the search, I think it was for the first 2 days, and after that his parents came in and flew in and then took him back with them, and that's where they lawyered up.
And then, as a last-ditch effort, police searched the landfill used by the city of Bloomington.
Probably the hardest thing that we had to do in the searches was to go to that landfill.
Yeah.
Stand there, watch them.
The search turned up empty. But now there is a new lead from that Find Lauren site that has led former FBI agent Brad Garrett to the banks of the Ohio River, a lead that he believes may hold the best chance for an answer.
There was a kid in prison by the name of Corey Hammersley.
Hammersley, once a star student and athlete in Indiana, got deep into the drug scene, and 1 year after Lauren's disappearance, had a meltdown high on drugs.
steps out of his apartment, has nothing on but a hat, takes a firearm and starts shooting into a house.
A naked man armed with a gun
fired as many as 15 rounds.
Captured, prosecuted, and sentenced to 24 years in state prison, where the new lead emerged.
This is coming through another inmate that was locked up with Corey. They were playing cards. Lauren's picture comes up on the television.
Missing IU student Lauren Spierer.
And immediately, Corey looks up at the TV and says, "Man, I knew the guys that did that."
The inmate who served time with Hammersley agreed to recount what he says Hammersley told him if we blacked out his face.
And they were drinking and got to doing ecstasy, and she OD'd. It scared them. They didn't know what to do with her, and they took her down to the Ohio River and got rid of her, and then he said disposed of her body.
This is a theory you are taking a hard look at.
Absolutely, because one of the mistakes in most criminal cases is we investigators try to make them too complicated. The simplest is she died at a party in Bloomington and somebody got rid of her.
And it could be right here in this
And
river.
it could be right here exactly at the Ohio River.
The theory made even more sense when Garrett learned from Lauren's parents that she had a serious heart ailment. So serious, she had to give up sports in school.
So guys, it's at this point in the video that I actually went for a drive. I had a break because I'd been on this all day. Just as a really quick note coming in right here before we get into the case analysis. But I felt it very important to share. So I rarely go out at night, but I had this massive craving for some chocolate. So what I've done is I've gone in the car, it's 9:30 at night, and go to Woolies, and then I'm getting back in the car and I'm driving back home. And I'm hearing on the radio station that I'm playing on Triple J this song, and it's like a hip-hop song, and they're singing the lyrics, and I didn't understand it at first, and then I'm listening to it and I'm going, what? And my jaw dropped, because you got to understand, I've just been on this video, I've just taken a break, gone down the street, and I'm thinking about Lauren. At this point, I'm thinking about everything that we've learned here, and I'm thinking about the tarot reading that I did just recently as well. If you want to check that out after this video, you can do so as well. And we're about to get to the point of discussing further into this, but I was absolutely gobsmacked, because on the actual song lyrics, I'm hearing it over the radio going, ecstasy party, it's an ecstasy party, it's an ecstasy party, we're effing stupid for doing it, but whatever. And that's the chorus. And I'm thinking, holy crap. Because as you know, you guys know, if you're part of this, if you're subbed to my channel, that I do tarot readings, spirit sessions, I'm highly spiritual, I'm a medium. I believe that when you ask for a sign, and I've been asking Lauren to help me find out exactly what happened to her. And I'm taking that as a sign, guys. I'm taking it as a sign that that is what happened. It falls in line with my tarot reading, it falls in line with the PI, I think, feels that it's more in her circle rather than an abduction. And we're going to get into the theories as well. I mean, yes, it could be an abduction, who knows. But it's very interesting that everything seems to go back to the guys. And the prison guy, you know, the inmate, comes forward and says that one of the guys that was there in prison said he was there when this happened, and he knew the guys that did it, and they were having an ecstasy party. And I just can't get over this, guys. I just can't get over it. And some of you might think it's a coincidence. That's fine. You're allowed to think that. That's fine. But for me, it was just like an aha moment at that moment. I seriously, my jaw dropped. I'm like, oh my God, she's just answered me. Spirit do contact us and communicate through various signs. It can be music, it can be things that we can visually see, you know, like it might be a coin on the ground we find, or it could be even clairaudiently, we hear our name, or we might hear their voice, we might smell their scent. There's different ways they come through, and a lot of the time they actually come through in song lyrics. So I'm just amazed with this. Okay, so let's get back into this, and I'm sorry if you can hear background noises. I'm in my house, and I have other people living here, and I've got my animals running around, scratching things, so just bear with me if you hear anything. I'm sorry about that. So let's get into this now. We're going to get into the case analysis. So after the guys lawyered up, they pretty much stonewalled the parents. I think Jay and Jesse were initially helping police, obviously, but were helping the parents for a short time. But then they all stonewalled the parents after a while. You can understand Corey, doing that because he had no loyalty to Lauren whatsoever. He was a stranger, basically, to her. He only knew her for 2 days. So, him just stonewalling and making no comments and shielding behind a lawyer, they're rich kids too. They come from rich homes, so they're able to pay for the top lawyers. And if they have done something, they've basically gotten away with it so far. So while it's not a crime to actually, be silent and not talk to the parents and all that kind of stuff, it's awfully sus, guys, and it doesn't make them look good at all. If anything, they look like assholes, and I'm just going to say that outright, because these parents, I feel so sorry for these parents. They have no answers. These guys were the last ones to see Lauren, maybe not Jesse, if it's true he was in his apartment all night and didn't know what was going on around him. That's one thing. But Corey and Jay, they really should be held accountable, especially Corey, who knew that Lauren was so intoxicated she could not even walk. She was stumbling and falling literally on her face, to the point where he went to take her to her apartment, and then he's carried her all the way back to where the party began, which was at Jay's. So that pisses me off, and you can hear it, because if you know me, I actually do get involved with this emotionally. I get charged up because it's real, guys. This is real life. This is a real person who's gone missing, real people who are suffering here. And yeah, as a psychic medium as well, I'm tuning into all that stuff, and it gets me angry. So you will hear that in some of my cases where I just get charged, yeah. So I'm just pissed off. I think, why do these parents not have answers? Not long after, Rob and Charlene Spierer filed civil lawsuits against Corey, Jay, and Mike Beth for their involvement with their daughter leading up to her disappearance. So basically, they've stated that there has been negligence because, a couple of them were supplying alcohol, knowing she was already heavily intoxicated, and it was obvious that she was, because she was falling and everything. And then they neglected to ensure that she was returned safely to her apartment, which they had many, these guys were afraid for her safety. They've actually stated that. Mike Beth said, I told her to stay here so she wouldn't, she'd be safe. And then he's rung Jay to come and get her or something, or he took her over to Jay's place. So they're looking after her like that, but they're not actually walking her back to her apartment. If anyone is the good one here, it's David Rohn. He's the one that actually walked her all the way to Jay's and then walked back. He seems to be quite mature for his age and knows what to do under those circumstances. Now, I understand the other guys were also intoxicated. I don't know if Mike Beth was at all, and the judge had dismissed Mike's case anyway because they said that he didn't have a duty of care for Lauren. So Rob and Charlene believed their daughter would most likely be alive today if she was safely taken back to her apartment and wasn't fed more alcohol, and put in a vulnerable position where she's now become a missing person. So the case was dismissed due to a lack of evidence. They can't prove, without citing Lauren, they can't really prove that her disappearance was as a result of what these guys did or didn't do. So basically the courts are stating that Jay, Corey and Mike Beth don't have a legal responsibility of Lauren. They don't have to show any kind of duty of care towards her. There should be no responsibility on them because they're not superiors like a parent. Their classmates help, sharing drinks or whatever it was. And I'm thinking that's just not true. Corey was older than Lauren, and he was serving, apparently he was the one supplying the drinks. How else was she getting the drinks? Maybe with a fake ID. But even if that was the case, Corey knew that Lauren was in a very bad drunken state, that to the point where she couldn't even function properly, she couldn't even walk properly. She was sitting there and falling flat on her face and hitting her head on steps. He knew she was in a bad state because he had to carry her. And for him to carry her through the alleyway for a 6-minute walk or whatever it might have been, he mustn't have been that intoxicated. Because how can a guy pick up someone and not, stumble around and drop her? I reckon he wasn't as intoxicated as her. Why did they stop off to her apartment and then turn around? Was it because the guys were at the elevator and then he's realised, oh, they're friends of Jesse's and they're going to know I'm with Lauren, so if I want to do something with Lauren, I can't do it at her apartment because you might have the boyfriend come after me. What if that's one reason? Or what if, they went to her apartment and she picked up something from there? Because the police found a small amount of cocaine in her room. So who's to say that they didn't pick up some kind of drug that was already there and went back to Jay's? In another report I read, it stated that Lauren and Corey had returned back to Corey's apartment after leaving her apartment. And that Mike Beth had actually come home late and he thought someone had, he thought burglars were in his home because he heard people in there, not knowing it was Lauren and Corey. So it's just interesting how that's a different account to what we were told in another report stating that Mike was home doing a paper or something, he was doing something, and Corey and Lauren have turned up and Corey's vomited on the stairs and gone up to bed. So there's two accounts that are different here. There's one stating that Mike was first there when they turned up, and then the second account is saying that they were there first and then Mike turned up and was surprised that they were there. So it makes sense to me that Corey has it in his head, I'm going to take Lauren back to my apartment, and they might have picked up something from her place. Some kind of drug, who knows? She might have said to him, hey, let's go to my house and get some drugs. We just don't know. I'm not trying to paint her in a bad light at all. I'm just stating, I was young once. I never tried cocaine, but I was on, weed and drinking, and you kind of get a bit mischievous. So, when you're intoxicated and you're with friends, you just want to have a fun time. And, if she had that available to her, what's to say that she didn't say, let's go and get this? Or he might have said, do you have something? And she said, yeah, in my house, I'll go get it. And I believe it was his intention to bring her back to his apartment, whether it was to have sex with her or whether it was to drink more or do drugs together. I feel like there was an intention. Well, why was he already at her apartment if he had good intentions? He would have said, I want you to be safe, have a good night's sleep, talk tomorrow. A real good person, a decent person would do that. But no, he had other intentions. Even though she was stumbling and falling and all those things, he wanted to take her to his apartment, and he even carried her in order to do so. So, as we heard earlier in this video, FBI agent Brad Garrett explains to ABC News 2020 that drugs are a key component in this investigation regarding Lauren's disappearance. He said that when something happens to somebody, it's usually within their own circle. Even though he's not ruling out the abduction theory, it's interesting that he does state that investigators tend to complicate investigations with their theories rather than just seeing something as simple as being, it could just be simple as, okay, she's been intoxicated during the night, something's happened to her, they've panicked and they've got rid of her body. Many factors tend to point towards the overdose theory. An accident, due to intoxication or something's happened to her, because we see her visibly, there's surveillance camera footage of her being visibly intoxicated and stumbling and falling and hitting her head. And witnesses at Kilroy's sports bar saw her drinking, they saw her stumbling and intoxicated. We've got witnesses in Jay and Mike, Beth, and maybe Corey as well, all stating that she would have been drinking. I don't know if they told investigators if she took any drugs, but as I said, cocaine was found in her bedroom. And Jay had later claimed that he, Lauren and David Rohn had come up to him and had stated that they had crushed up Klonopin and snorted it before heading out that night. So Klonopin is an anti-anxiety medication. It's a downer. It slows things down. So I kind of think to myself, what if they did do some cocaine in her bedroom before they left that night, cocaine being an upper, okay? And if they did snort Klonopin or take Klonopin somehow to kind of balance it out, I don't know, because Klonopin is a downer. So I'm just speculating with that, but it's interesting that's been raised as a topic. So another factor in here is Lauren's heart condition, which was called, what was it called? Long QT, which I think means that there's fast, like rapid chaotic heartbeats, and in severe cases it can cause sudden death. Okay, so people can pass out, it can cause sudden death. So did something like that happen to Lauren because she had so many substances in her system? Drinking, maybe taking cocaine or ecstasy, as was stated by Corey. And that's yet another factor on top of this case, is that there's another person, a third person coming forward, or a sixth person, however you want to say that, but I'm saying it's a third party as well, who's not even in the circle. They're in prison and telling an inmate about this, that they know who did it, and it was an ecstasy party, and it had gone wrong. So we've got another connection with drugs right here as well. So really, at this point, there's no evidence that, as far as I know, that Lauren had been taking ecstasy or Klonopin or any other type of drug, but there was evidence of cocaine found in her bedroom, which you could only assume that she has ingested at some point. Once again, there's no 100% evidence on that either, as far as I'm aware. But when you have different accounts of people in the same groups who, even that Seth guy who was talking to Rossman about what they were doing that night, he said there was drugs involved with the college students. They would often go off and buy, LSD, cocaine, marijuana, whatever they could get their hands on, basically, as well as alcohol. So when you mix those two together, it's obviously going to cause complications, especially with someone who has a heart condition. So I researched ecstasy with heart conditions, and it did state that with prolonged use, it can cause multiple forms of arrhythmia, as well as other cardiovascular toxicities. Okay, so basically it stated that usually as a once-off, it's usually uncommon for like a heart attack or something like that to occur. I don't know if Lauren ever mixed, drugs with alcohol often. You would think that with her heart condition, would she even be able to? Maybe she was on ecstasy and cocaine and different things. Who knows what could have been in her system that night? Maybe she was given something she wasn't even aware of from someone else. It's not unusual to think that other college students would have had other forms of drugs with them that night. And maybe she was so off her head, out of her head on these drugs, or even just alcohol on its own can cause someone to, to become intoxicated to the point where you don't know what you're doing all the time. So she might have even said yes to something, not thinking of its, consequences. So cocaine, on the other hand, can constrict the heart's blood vessels and makes the heart work harder and faster to pump blood. So it can cause heart rhythm problems, heart attack and stroke. Now, there was evidence of that being in her bedroom. So it's fair to say, that she could have been ingesting that with her alcohol as well. And that could have contributed to something bad happening to her, okay? And people freaking out about that, especially if they supplied it to her. So if drugs were not the reason, if there was no overdose or any kind of accident that occurred among her college friends or acquaintances, Then the other theory is the abduction theory. Was Lauren taken? Okay, because if it's true what Jay said, that she had left his apartment at 4:30 a.m. and he last saw her standing at the intersection of 11th Street and College Avenue, is it, possible that someone came along and just took her off the street? In the early hours of June 3rd, 2011, around the time that Lauren was reported being at the intersection by Jay, this white truck was seen on surveillance cameras circling around the block near the apartments there. When I first saw this photo of the truck, I instantly thought I could see a young woman in the back of the ute tray, and I'm not the only one. Other people have also, many web sleuths, etc., and even just people I know just recently have looked at it and thought, okay, there's a young girl in the back there. I can see her hair. And, then I actually found just now, someone had actually drawn exactly how I had seen this person, or what looks to be a person, sitting in the back of the ute tray there. Now, what seems to be a picture of a woman has been ruled out. Okay, so basically what's happened is the police have tracked down the driver of this white ute, have found out some things, investigated, and this person has been ruled out as a suspect. Okay, so that whole theory of a woman being in the back of the tray is just not correct. Sometimes our eyes can deceive us. We think we're seeing things when we're not. I mean, it looks so much like Lauren, how I would see a woman sitting up in the ute tray, but then I think logically, if someone's going to kidnap somebody, you wouldn't put them in the back of a ute tray where they can jump out. You're going to put them in the back seat. I mean, it's a dual cab, so he would be putting her in the back seat for sure. So we got to kind of think logically with this as well. Because, you might say, well, he tied her to something, but she's visible. If that's her sitting up, I mean, that would be stupid. There would be many other college students coming back, probably drunk, walking around. Other witnesses or even the cameras themselves could see whether some guy has stepped out of a vehicle and actually, put her in the car, and she's visible. So you'd think if you're going to kidnap someone, you'd put them in the car very quickly when nobody can see her. So this guy, ex-convict James McClish, was brought to former FBI agent Brad Garrett's attention because a woman from James's past had actually reached out to Garrett and stated that this guy, James, had told her that he had killed and buried Lauren on a farm in southern Indiana. I'm pretty sure it was. Was it? Yes, I'm just going to quickly check that. Yes, on a farm in southern Indiana. And she said that he had said to her, I could do the same thing. What happened to Lauren, I could do the same thing to you. Now, he had just come out of prison for strangling his ex-wife. Okay, and he lived 10 minutes away at a halfway house, not far from Lauren's, and he drove a similar white truck. That's why he was also a person of interest, because his truck was similar to the one that was sighted on the surveillance camera. Now, whether he's the driver or not the driver, whichever way, he's been cleared. He did a polygraph test. They've obviously looked into him. They would have probably checked his phone records and other things, okay? They would have investigated him thoroughly, and he's been cleared as well. Another person of interest came to former FBI agent Brad Garrett's attention when he was messaged by a relative of this guy, Robert Strange, otherwise known as Bo Dean, who is a motorcycle club member. Okay, so his motorcycle gang is called Sons of Silence. Now, Bo Dean doesn't have a criminal record, but he is known as someone who others come to get things done. So basically what's happened is the relative has contacted Brad Garrett about Bo Dean, stating that Bo Dean had told them that he had killed, or shot, I should say, even shot Lauren and buried her on his property over money and a drug debt. So, police looked into that. they realised that Lauren's phone and the pings and everything didn't match up with what this other person had said about Bodine. They've obviously looked into that as well as for the connection. I mean, would Lauren, you know, this 4'11" young girl, be going up to a motorcycle gang member and saying, hey, you know, here to pick up my meth or my cocaine or whatever it is? I just don't see her being that kind of person that is going to approach a gang of, you know, this motorbike gang, club members. I just don't see that. So he said, I don't even know the broad. So, you know, police ruled him out very quickly. Another important thing to mention here is that CCTV cameras never caught Lauren on any cameras walking back, you know, supposedly from Jay's house at 4:30 in the morning. No CCTV cameras spotted her. So we've got gas stations, we've got different buildings around there that had CCTV, and I would think if there was another vehicle circling around that area, just like they caught the white truck, you would think they'd catch another vehicle and be chasing that down and putting that in the news as well. So that kind of makes me wonder. It does make me wonder, was she actually taken? But you know, it's a very plausible theory. I mean, women do go missing, and there has been a history of young girls going missing from Bloomington, Indiana, and they have been university students as well. So we're going to take a look at that, okay? I took a look online and I started researching missing people, and I was trying to narrow it down to Bloomington, Indiana. I did actually find on the Indiana State Police website an Indiana missing person bulletin. So they have the name of the person and the date of birth, the reporting agency, and the date last seen. So for the purpose of this case, I did narrow it down to the Bloomington Police Department as being the reporting agency. I know there's a case here that I'm about to mention in a moment of a woman who went missing from Bloomfield, which is 38 minutes away from Bloomington. It's a 38-minute drive, but she was reported through the Bloomington agency as being missing. So that's what I've just narrowed it down to. Now, through this massive list on the bulletin of missing persons, like it's hundreds of people on there, I narrowed it down to 21 people that were coming up under Bloomington agency. Now, 14 of those people I couldn't find on Google, and I'm thinking it might be because some people who go missing are actually found not long after. It could be that they're found safe. It could be that there was a suicide. You know, they're not really reported on the news. Someone might have overdosed. You know, it could be any one of those factors. But 7 people I did find, and some of them don't fit the profile of, you know, like a university student, you know, going missing in the middle of the night, that kind of thing. One guy, where was he? Yeah, I mean, there was an older lady too, but one guy, where is he? He went missing, his house got ransacked. There was a break-in in his house and phone lines were cut, and he went missing in 1982. So that's a guy from way back, okay? So I don't think he would really fit the profile regarding young women going missing. We've got Eva Hale, I think it was, yes, who disappeared visiting a cemetery, and she was 79 years old. She went missing from Greene County, Indiana, which is a 41-minute drive to Bloomington, and she went missing in 1996. So I feel like her profile would be very different once again. Now we've got Margaret Hayes, another lady. She was actually very young. She went missing in 1977, and she was 22 years old. And she was last seen buying cigarettes at a store, and she, you know, she was on a break from uni, so she was an actual university student. That's quite a long time ago. You know, whether it fits the profile, I'm not sure. Depends on how old this guy is. You know, if it is the same person doing this with these young girls. I mean, there's a few unsavory characters in Indiana there anyway, in Bloomington. So yeah, it's interesting. And I don't think they're all in Bloomington with these particular ones. I think some of them are just outside of. Then we had Willow McBride, and she's a little baby. Like, that would definitely not fit the profile. We had Gwen Prince, who was 55 years of age, disappeared in 1993, and there's no real details of her disappearance. So the only people I could really find that really did kind of fit a profile, and around the date, okay, around the time, was, and I mean this is 11 years, earlier, but there was Jill Berman. In terms of university students, okay, we're going to have a look at that profile. The earliest one that I could find was in 2000. Jill Berman, 19 years old, went on a bike ride at 9 a.m. in the morning. She was meant to meet her grandfather at 3 p.m. that day, and her bike was found in a field. Her body was found 3 years later in a wooded area in Morgan County. So upon investigating her remains and cause of death, it was found that she had a bullet hole in her skull. So whoever killed her, well, they've actually arrested a guy called John Myers in relation to her death. He's currently appealing for a new trial. Around 2 weeks after Jill's disappearance, an 18-year-old woman had reported to police that she was walking behind an old black Ford pickup truck in Ellettsville, which is 3 miles away from where Jill's bike was found, when the driver tried pulling her into his vehicle. Another incident not long after was reported by a female cyclist who was riding along a road when a vehicle had actually rammed into her bike, causing her to fall off her bike. The driver got out and tried to drag her into his vehicle, and a witness had come along to help. And this composite that you can see here is the description that woman gave. What interests me about this composite is that it looks so much like this guy, Daniel Messer, who was 50 years old at the time that he killed Hannah Wilson, a 22-year-old Bloomington University student who was out partying with friends at Kilroy Sports Bar. She got a cab and went home that night, and not long after, her body was unfortunately found 10 miles away in a vacant lot. Daniel Messer was arrested shortly after. If Daniel Messer was the guy who tried to abduct those women in 2000, who's to say he didn't try and abduct other people before he killed Hannah in 2015? Could he have taken Lauren? Daniel Messer would have been 35 in the year 2000, and he would have been 46 in 2011, the year that Lauren disappeared. So another missing persons case is Marina Pearl Bolter. Now, she was an 18-year-old girl who went missing from Bloomfield. She was last seen at Sunoco gas station opposite her workplace, which was IGA, on December 31st, 2014. Now, she got a lift in a silver car with a middle-aged man, a Caucasian man, wearing glasses. So this was only 3 years after Lauren's disappearance, and even though it's not anything to do with a university student or in Bloomington itself, the reporting agency was Bloomington. And when we think about it, really, Bloomfield is really not that far away. It's only a 38-minute drive. So if someone is a serial killer on the prowl, but it's interesting with this case though, because it shows that she got into a car, so it's not like she was kidnapped as such, meaning in a violent, aggressive way against her will. She may have voluntarily got in the car with a stranger. I just found this on the internet. This is the details of Marina's disappearance, and it doesn't sound really anything like Lauren's. So this guy that she got into the car with, it says that he has not been publicly identified, and he said that she told him she would attend his house party later that evening, but she didn't want him to know where she lived and asked to be dropped off at a closed down pizza restaurant. She's never been heard from again. And so she missed a visitation with her young son, and she failed to show up to work. And so therefore she was reported missing. Her purse, phone and keys were missing from her home, and the rest of her belongings at her residence were undisturbed. So it seems like no one's been at her residence. It seems like she never came home that night. And Bolter's ex-boyfriend, Douglas DJ Lockhart, who was the father of her son, was stabbed to death 6 weeks after her disappearance. But police are saying there's no evidence to suggest that there's a connection. with his murder and her disappearance. And the guy who gave her a ride the night she disappeared has prior criminal convictions for abduction and rape. And a man who lived in her apartment building had once been convicted of torturing and murdering a young girl, but they're saying no suspects have been named in her case, which I just find so strange. Maybe they have evidence that those people have been, maybe their phone pings or there was alibis of some sort that didn't connect them with her disappearance, but I just find that so bizarre. Of all the people to be, to have around you, you'd definitely be looking at them for sure. Another young person who went missing from Bloomington, Indiana was Frank Joseph Geezer III, otherwise known as Joey. He was 24 years old and was last seen in June 2009. He had a fight with a friend and then he left the house. He was going to go to music festivals in Tennessee and West Virginia, but he never arrived. He was known as a transient. He would travel across the country to different music festivals. In other reports that I've read, it states that he would hitchhike at times. And so his mother hasn't received any contact from him since June the 2nd. She said he didn't sound like he was on drugs or alcohol, and he seemed to be in good spirits. Now, whether this is in relation to Lauren's disappearance, it doesn't seem to be. We don't really know who's hanging around Bloomington, if there is a serial killer, some unsavory person hanging around, because we can see that there's been some strange activity going on with attempted kidnappings. We don't really know who picked up Joey or where he's gone from leaving the house after that argument. So now we're fast forwarding to 2017, where there were 2 attempted abductions at the university in Bloomington. One was a 21-year-old female who was a student, and she had told police that someone who was about 6 foot tall with an average build tried to force her into his vehicle while she was walking alongside the path of the Indiana 45-46 bypass. They said that the guy pulled up behind her and asked if she needed help. And then he tried to grab her and she's rolled off into a ditch and she suffered minor injury. A second abduction attempt happened about an hour later at 1 a.m. and a black Jeep Cherokee had actually pulled up behind this girl, and one asked if she needed a ride and she said no, so one of the suspects actually got out of the car and hit her in the face. She was knocked to the ground, lost a tooth during the attack, but managed to escape, and she said that these guys were in their 20s. There was 3 of them. So out of the people that we've just spoken about, there was Jill Berman and Hannah Wilson, who were definitely abducted and unfortunately murdered, and rest in peace, young ladies. It's a tragic thing to happen. We've had the attempted abductions not long after Jill's disappearance. Okay, so it's evident, okay, that women are taken off the streets. In the other cases, we're not sure what happened to Marina, and we don't know what's happened with Frank. With Lauren, we're not really too sure either. It's either 2 things here. She either overdosed and there's a cover-up with her friends, or she was taken off the street by a stranger, or even by somebody she knew. It was stated after Lauren's disappearance that Jay Rosenbaum, a mutual friend of Jessie and Lauren, held the house party that Lauren had attended earlier in the night, and it was stated that he had actually had out-of-town visitors from Michigan, and witnesses had actually said that they saw some guys outside Jay's apartment packing up bags in a vehicle at very early hours in the morning and taking off. Now, if these guys have come in from out of town and they're partying and they're drinking and who knows what else, usually people sleep in, and they're not waking up bright and early and cheery and wanting to go on a long drive home. So that was a little sus. And it was stated that on the night or the early hours of the morning when Lauren had disappeared, the surveillance cameras at the 5 North townhomes were not working that night. So that's very interesting in itself, and upsetting as well, because if there were cameras, there'd be more of an idea as to what may have happened to Lauren. There would be evidence if she did walk down towards the intersection. But even so, there would be other There would be other security cameras around town that surely would have picked her up, you would think. But it's just very interesting that so many factors point towards the guys that Lauren was with. But as we can see, abduction theory is possible as well. What do you guys reckon about all of this? What do you think is the most likely scenario here as to why Lauren disappeared? Did she drink too much? Was she given a drug? Did she take drugs voluntarily? She's got a heart condition. She had fallen flat on her face, maybe had a concussion. The guy in prison had stated that he knew the guys that did that, meaning that there was an overdose of ecstasy, and the guys panicked and covered it up and put her in the Ohio River. Or there's the abduction theory. Was she plucked off a street by some, stranger or someone she knew? Even though a vehicle was not sighted on CCTV cameras like the other vehicle was. Did a stranger just get lucky and happen to pick her up in a place where there were no CCTV cameras? What do you guys reckon? I'd like to hear your thoughts on this. And let's pray for justice for Lauren.